So I really have a mixed feeling coming here because I was talking to Sarah during lunchtime as to with the COVID-19, I think the in-person audience is shrinking. There's a lot of audience that's virtual Zoom, and I'm somebody I believe in touch, feel, sense, smell, taste. So, but at the same time, I feel at home here. I've never met your family, sir, but there are many things that I realize that are common, and we'll talk about it at the end of the day. About how privileged and honored I feel to be here in front of all of you. This is my second or third talk on the book, but this is kind of my heart is here. So, without undue delay, I'll just straight away jump into the book and the topic, and then take any questions. So this is like just the typical CME stuff. I have to do that. I have no conflict of interest to declare. I'll be not discussing any off-label use. This is what is damning statistics. Out of 2.53 million deaths in 2011, only 40% were in the hospice. That means 60% patients didn't get a choose. Doesn't have to be hospice facility. It could be hospice at home as well. So the idea is that when we know that death is approaching, there's a hesitation. And I hate to say this, but when President Nixon declared the war on cancer, I say, who are we fighting against? Where did cancer come from? It's part of my own body. It's part of my own DNA. So how can I fight against my own DNA? But the impact is that we divide the team between winners and losers. So as an oncologist, if I have to win, I have to keep injecting poisons even knowing that the patient is not going to leave. And it's the stigma, which coach would like to admit that the team is losing? And if I'm an ecosystem leader in a team, that actually leads to hesitation on the part of physicians, even though they perceive that we are approaching death. And sometimes it will be multiple factors, battle against the cancer. What is battle? I mean, why do we have to keep saying war, battle, fight? We can't, it's again, we know that it's my own DNA. So why don't we create a symbiosis? We can live in perfect harmony. So that actually is leading to close to 1.5 million Americans not getting what they need to have at the end of their life. So when we look at the pathways of dying, you have suddenly kind of sudden death that happens during accidents, steady decline, fluctuating decline, and fragile. We don't have a control on the A bar, but B, C, and D, these are the three different ways where we could slowly prepare patient and the loved ones. So less than 18% of the students received any formal end-of-life care education. That means 4 out of 5 American healthcare providers are not exposed to learn about death and dying as a process. 39% felt unprepared to address patients' fear about death. And that's the reality. As an oncologist, I would say a third to half of my patients will be terminal and they will be dying at something as simple as that. But if 4 out of 10 of my colleagues are not prepared psychologically, it's only going to hurt the care because patient and the family, they're going to let me inject poison in their body. There's a potential that I could be cause of their death by side effects. If they put so much trust in me, why can't I help them the privilege and honor of being ready so that they are not left behind with any grief? More than half of the doctors are unprepared to deal with their own feeling of grief. And 40% of the physicians and residents surveyed felt that dying patients were not considered good teaching material. Most medical schools don't require a course on the dying process. So consequences. Patient suffers because surveys have shown that patients dying in ICU have much worse quality of death, and the relatives have much worse adverse outcomes. Caregivers have mental issues. It's a financial burden to the system as well. And I personally feel that morally and ethically, if I know that somebody is approaching the death, it's onus falls on me to shed my fears about being a loser of the team and share with the family that yes, and is approaching. Why can't we talk about that, the invariable, inevitable process of being born as a human being? So again, 3 Canadian schools hospital studies showed that more than half physicians struggle with their failure, self-doubt, sadness, and powerlessness. And this is all because we stigmatized cancer as an enemy. They also have unacknowledged grief. And I think, I am a human being. So if I lose a patient, I do carry that sensation. And when I have a patient who dies, I tell my wife to leave me alone that day, because as much as she loves me, I don't want my grief to spill over onto her. And I try to attend most of my patients' deaths. I mean, I see less patients now, but when I was active, I used to go to their place. I tell them that, please call me if he's dying, I want to be there. Half of the doctors, actually oncologists, they would distance themselves. They say, oh, I want to hand it over. And that's wrong, because if I've been with the family for 3 years, I become part of their family. So why can't I be there when they leave this world? And again, I think these are all the statistics that actually result from the fact that we've again branded death as a failure, because we want to win the war, and no country, no army wants to lose the war. So science also helped to realize that early intervention of hospice improves quality and cost efficiency. Most of the people would prefer to die at home. A third of them end up in dying in a hospital. Nearly 25% of the Medicare expenses are spent in last 2 months of life in intensive care. And cancer patients dying in the hospital or ICU have much worse quality of life, and the caregivers have lingering psychiatric issues. Those patients who are terminally ill, when they manage to talk to doctors about end-of-life care, the uptake of hospice rate goes up by 50%. So let's jump on this book. So I came across this patient. His wife was actually at Moffitt. She moved to our area to become the director of hospital in oncology program. And Harry, her husband, was a Britisher. So Britain, they have done very good job in hospice and end-of-life care. He was diagnosed with stage advanced lung cancer. And he came to see me with his wife once, and then he wanted to talk to me in person, and he asked me, what do you think will happen? I said, 3 to 4 months if you don't take treatment, maybe a year or 2 if you take treatment. And he said, narrate all the side effects. We went home, came back a week later and said, I don't want to do treatment. I said, doesn't matter, I still will be a doctor. So he had tears in his eyes. He said, I feel that you are going to be with me. And then he said, the only request I have is I want to learn about death and dying. So all of these questions he had was, how will I die? What will happen to my body? Will I be in pain? Will I be in a coma? All of these questions. And one thing that he asked, I have it in a book, is that I don't think my wife can handle my death. Is there a way that she would not witness me dying? And this is kind of, secret I'll reveal at the end. So we decided that we'll meet once a week at my clinic. So we have a very untraditional practice. We have a holistic practice, 20 feet diameter copper dome, 2-acre healing garden. Patients can walk into some of the memory walks. We have some of the plants planted by patient and loved ones. So we decided to meet once a week, and I said, I'll narrate you one patient story beginning from 26-year-old girl who died of cancer to 90-year-old person who died of cancer. And the dialogue became the book. And a couple of incidents I want to narrate is, I was not on call. I was getting ready to go and attend a wedding, and I got this call. saying that there's an attorney John York wants to talk to. I know you're not on call. Picked up the phone and he says, my mom is dying, and she mutters your name. So I told my wife, I said, my professional call takes priority. Why don't you take care of attending wedding? I went there, and she was, of course, in a hospice care in a nursing home. And she was in coma for almost like 3 days, but slowly she says, Dr. Patel. So I went and touched her hand. I kind of rubbed my hand on her forehead. She almost like woke up from coma and died in my hands. So what I realized was that there is a part of me that becomes part of her ecosystem and DNA. And if I was not there, she would have passed away anyway, but it would have been unfair to her and family. Her son-in-law teaches journalism at University of South Carolina, and he said, I still cannot forget the scene that we are all surrounding her bed, and she said she was apparently waiting for you to give her permission to leave this world. Her son John then, who was a very powerful attorney, founder of one of the biggest law firm in Charlotte, pancreatic cancer, gets in a hospice care and moves down to Myrtle Beach. And probably, this happened about 4 years after she passed away. And his sister called me and says, Kashyap, I think John needs you. So I drove down 4 hours one way and sat down with him, had a nice dialogue. And that all is a part of the book. And he died next day after I kind of finished that conversation. This is the third case. This was during my fellowship. I was doing fellowship at Jefferson. And another attorney, he actually was one of the founding partners of Saltz Mongelucci law firm, Steve Saltz. I'd moved down to Charlotte, and 3 years later, my program director calls me and says, Kashyap, Steve needs you. He's at the beach on hospice care. So I dropped everything, flew to Philadelphia, went to his place, and his wife told me that in 67 years of his life, he's never waited like anyone like the way he waited for you. And he passed away that night. So there are bondages that happen between physician and a patient. We don't realize, we are programmed to look at human existence as things we can see, touch, feel, taste, and what's the fifth one? Yeah, smell. But there's something above and beyond these 5 senses. We are learning more about it now, but I think these are all elements that tell me that once a patient has his life on my side, I become part of their ecosystem, and I cannot be disloyal to them for the faith that they put in me. So I thought I'll compile all of this conversation and put them in the form of a book. This is the most touching email. So Harry, before he died, he gave me access to his private email account. He says, my wife will not be able to handle it, but I want you to send a hit the send button, because I've had about 400 people I want them to know about this, and just send them this email. And this is the most revealing, that this email is different from my usual no smiley faces. I've often thought that the life is rather like a queue, British words, at the departure level of a large airport. We all have our places in our individual queue, and from the moment we are born, we are slowly but surely moved towards the head of the line. There we take our turn to get checked out and receive a boarding pass to our next place. My place in the long line of life has suddenly been jumped up to the head of the queue, and now I have a boarding pass. I want you to know that I'm looking forward to the adventures beyond this world. And I certainly don't want to join the many folks towards the head of the line who are in beds with their frail bodies pierced with tubes, with limbs missing, or staring into nowhere with an unseeing eyes, all of them waiting patiently for God. I, on the other hand, have had an exciting and enjoyable life to the end. I've married 3 times to my shame, and fathered 6 wonderful children. Now that I'm approaching 78 years of age, it's time to move on. I just want to let you know, my friends, whether close or far, dear friends or acquaintances, that I've enjoyed passing on the smiles, which I know most of you have appreciated, and to send all of my best wishes for the future. Live each day to the fullest. I saw him the night before he died. Very interesting. So his wife called me, says, I think he's dying. So I went, spent an hour with him. And then I knew that he was going to die. So I said, be with him. Next day, I met his wife and I said, what happened? He said, he passed away. I said, what happened? She said, 2 in the morning, all of a sudden, alarm rang, my cats jumped out of the room. I chased the cats, and then he took the last breath. So he did not want his wife to be physically present when he took the last breath, and it happened. So cats made it happen. We never realize that there's so much ecosystem that happens there, and we in our kind of reductionist approach, compartmentalized approach, we take all this thing for granted, but it really happens. So these are some other quotes in a book. Life is a journey, death is a return to the earth, universe is like an inn, the passing years are like dust, regard this phantom world. Again, I think death is certain for those who are born, for those diseased, rebirth is certain. This is my personal journey. So I used to ride motorcycle back in India, but it was a necessity, it was not a luxury. During that career, I created a photography album. I had my photography exhibit. So the central page, the media coverage is my first photography exhibits. I walked into every walk of life, from addressing the Senate to the National Press Club, to be interviewed by the Washington Post, New York Times, CBS News. I still feel that the reductionist approach that we take in our life of commoditizing the human life, when we look at the cancer patient, we say, that's stage T2N1MX breast. No, that's Jane Doe with through children, parents alive. So we need to look at the person with abnormal piece of tissue, not the abnormal piece of tissue. And because when we target on that, we forget that there's a human being behind that, and the journey prevents us from being fair to them when we have to bid goodbye. I was honored when ASCO reached out to me in spring saying that they want to do my life story. And I literally couldn't believe, because they only choose 10 oncologists from across the world and publish the narratives in the life. And I put it up here because I want to show that in the left corner there's a statement called no line. I'm going to talk a little bit about the disparity piece, because I can never leave a stage without talking about the massive amount of cancer disparities that we have in this country. This is the summary of the AACR report published in 2020. 34% of all cancer deaths could be prevented if socioeconomic disparities were eliminated. That means 200,000 plus human beings are dying of the cause that is preventable every year. And if somebody is completely capitalist, say, well, I don't care, even for them, we spent $230 billion more in 3 years in the direct cost and about $1 trillion in the indirect cost. So my reason of bringing this is that our ecosystem is fragmented. From the time we are born until we die, in the pursuit of immortality, we are forgetting that there are a lot of small things that can be fixed. At the same time, if somebody talks about evidence-based medicine, in JAMA Oncology, in July, there's an article that gut microbiome predicts the outcome of immunotherapy. It also predicts the outcome of the bone marrow transplant. And these articles are written not by some community doctor, they're written by MD Anderson and Harvard. So these are like authentic people who are doing research. Chronic stress promotes cancer development. This is latest one, actually. This was publication on NIH website recently, about 2 years back. So we are creating a hostile environment for a human being rather than helping them from the time they come to us to the time they are getting ready to depart the world. So I could not live with the guilt. I said we need to do something, but knowing that only local intervention can help. So we started a project called No One Left Alone in our community in about 7 counties that we serve. We decided to fragment into the 5 initiatives. One is the existing cancer patients needed to have the treatment right there and then. So we started economic help, then we looked into the NGS testing, then we looked into cancer screening, then we are looking into the social determinants of health. And the last bucket is actually the bring clinical trials to the community practices. If we fix all of these, we can bring down the disparity related mortality to at least half, if not more. So these are some of the publications that came out in last 1 year addressing cancer disparities in independent practices, translating word into action or walking the talk. We also increased biomarker testing. There were a few blogs that were published from the ACCC. And this highlights my last quarter. So I turned 60 last year, and I feel that I have to prepare for my own journey because I know that being part of the ecosystem, if I get a good doctor, good. If not, I may not be lucky enough. So I'm preparing my own journey. The NOLA that I created, I'm happy to say that we've received close to $1 million funding. We'll be collecting some more money to make sure that no patient in our territory will go unserved. I've been asked to write 2 more books by Penguin, The Soul Genome and Miraculous Cure. I'm writing a book, hopefully with Joe Alvarez from the City of Hope, on the ecosystem to humanize cancer. I got Living the Mission Award. The guy next to him is my dad. He passed away 3 years back. And since he passed away, this yellowtail hawk comes and visits me since 2019. Don't know the relationship with that, but I have a porch I meditate, and this hawk sits in front of the porch, guides me, and then I keep this sentence that I'm neither earth nor water nor fire nor wind or space. For the sake of freedom, know yourself as embodiment of pure eternal consciousness and witness thereof, your unbound pure awareness, supreme eternal bliss. And with that, I'll pause here. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you so much, Dr. Patel. Any questions, comments from the audience?
I know you talked a lot about residents and students in medical school, but do you have any data on APPs or nurses as far as like the holistic approach and hospice with APPs?
I can say my personal experience is APPs and nurses are more compassionate. I hesitate to say as a physician, as a co-op president, but I personally feel that a lot of time they Naga said, Dr. Patel, I think we need to talk about it. So we have to, I think physician becomes the coach. The whole issue is when we say it's a war on cancer, then the coach does not want to admit we are losing the war, or I'm the chief of the army, I don't want to lose the war. So that we are stigmatizing success and failure based on win or loss. But thank you for bringing, it's excellent point.
Well, I agree, just because I think that I'm an APP, and I think kind of my doc is the leader. He's the one that is giving the medications, and then I see myself as being able to take out that part of the win or lose, and I can see kind of the other picture of it.
Thank you. This is excellent what you're doing.
My other question is just about how do you kind of help with early integration of palliative care and then transition to hospice, and kind of the stigma behind that with patients not wanting to accept hospice?
So excellent question. In our practice, what we do is every patient with advanced cancer, where our aim is not to get them to remission, but to palliate, we bring up at the end that doing nothing is an option. We may not talk about it today, we may talk about it later on. So when you insert that little seed, you know that at some stage you'll be able to bring it up. We also tell them that I would love to get your family together one of the days, and I bring up the advanced care planning as well, because I tell them, I give my example, said I personally have had heart issue when I was 46. I have 2 stents in the heart, and I give example that when I was on a cath table, only thing I could see in front of me was a clock ticking. So I'm always ready. I say my bag is ready with anything that I have to lift. I don't want to carry any bad karma. So I give example that if something happened to you while going back from my office, who would you like to make a decision? So that makes conversation easy and open.
Very good. I have a few questions from the virtual audience. Does religious belief help or hinder acceptance of death?
It's how you handle religious belief actually. So my book, I've taken every religion's perception about death and dying, and understanding about religious belief help to physician, because I can then help them slowly accept that. Eventually I give example that anybody was born in a physical form, left the world in physical form to be buried. Then Christ was resurrected, but at one stage Christ decided to set an example for ordinary humanity. I want to go away with the body buried, and then I'll come back. So that helps you to really build up the whole conversation. And so in my experience, I think it has always helped.
Wonderful. Could you tell us more about some of the practices you use to remember patients who have died?
So we do celebration of life every year, and we invite every person who passed away with their loved ones. And we read out their name, we honor them, we tell patients who are advanced, this is patient that if you want to put a small plant here, we have 2-acre land. So I said, put a stone here, put a plant here, do whatever you want. And so that actually helps patients to be connected. I have some patients who keep coming back after their loved one passed away to see us every few months.
And then the last question is, as you kind of journey with people through their end-of-life stages, how do you ensure that you're not carrying the consumption of feelings and emotions that you go through each time with them?
So being able to have a full, I would say, unhindered but very spiritual conversation allows me to put a closure there and then. Actually, the carried forward effect would happen if I did not put a closure there and then. So my personal practice is that I want to put a complete closure to conversation so that we don't carry any sense of guilt or any sense of unfiltered emotions.
Wonderful. Dr. Patel, on behalf of the whole audience in person and virtually, thank you so much for sharing.
Thank you very much.